Drago Bludvist versus Judge Claude Frollo. Who's the more evil villain? In the realm of animated films, villains play a crucial role in shaping the narratives and moral landscapes of the stories. Two particularly memorable antagonists are Drago Bludvist from How to Train Your Dragon 2 and Judge Claude Frollo from Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Both characters are depicted as embodiments of evil, but their motivations, methods, and the impact of their actions provide a rich ground for comparison. This video will explore these aspects to determine who is more evil, Drago Bludvist or Frollo. Starting off with their backgrounds and motivations. For Drago, he's introduced as a warlord with a singular obsession to control all dragons and by extension dominate the world. His background is shrouded in mystery, but it is clear that his motivations are driven by a deep-seated need for power and control. Drago's past experiences, particularly a traumatic encounter with dragons, have instilled in him a belief that dragons must be subjugated rather than befriended. His worldview is shaped by fear and a desire for absolute power, leading him to use brutal methods to achieve his goals. As for Judge Claude Frollo, on the other hand, he's a high-ranking official in Paris with a rigid and zealous adherence to his own interpretation of religious doctrine. Frollo's motivations are rooted in his twisted sense of morality and righteousness. He believes that he is acting in the name of God, purging sin and corruption from the world. Frollo's background as a deeply religious figure, combined with his authoritative position, creates a character whose evil is intertwined with self-righteousness and hypocrisy. His desire to eradicate the so-called impurities in society, particularly against the Romani people and Quasimodo, stems from a perverted sense of divine duty. Next, their methods and actions. Drago's methods are characterized by sheer brutality and intimidation. He uses a combination of physical violence and psychological terror to subdue both humans and dragons. Drago's most notable act of cruelty is his control over the bewildered beast, a massive alpha dragon that he uses to dominate other dragons through fear. His approach to power is highly militaristic, as he builds an army of enslaved dragons to enforce his will. Drago's willingness to destroy entire villages, enslave creatures, and kill without hesitation highlights his ruthless nature. His actions are driven by a clear and unrelenting ambition to subjugate the world under his rule, showing little regard for life and freedom. As for Frollo, his evil manifests in more insidious ways. As a judge, he wields significant power over the lives of others, and he uses this power to enforce his harsh and prejudiced views. His persecution of the Romani people is particularly cruel, involving acts of violence, imprisonment, and public humiliation. Frollo's treatment of Quasimodo, whom he raises in the bell tower of Notre Dame, is another stark example of his cruelty. He manipulates and controls Quasimodo through a mixture of fear and false affection, keeping him isolated from the world. Frollo's most heinous act is his obsession with Esmeralda. His lust for her, coupled with his desire to punish her for her perceived sins, leads him to attempt to burn her at the stake when she rejects him. Frollo's methods are a blend of psychological manipulation, legal abuse, and religious fanaticism. Moving on to their impact on others, the impact of Drago's actions on the world of How to Train Your Dragon is profound and devastating. His reign of terror spreads fear among both humans and dragons, disrupting the peaceful coexistence that Hiccup and his allies strive to achieve. Drago's actions lead to the destruction of entire communities, the enslavement of dragons, and significant loss of life. The psychological toll on the characters, especially Hiccup and his friends, is considerable, as they are forced to confront the reality of a world where peace is constantly threatened by Drago's ambition. The death of Stoic, Hiccup's father, at the hands of a controlled dragon, adds a deeply personal dimension to Drago's impact, highlighting the far-reaching consequences of his evil. Frollo's impact is equally severe, albeit in a different context. His persecution of the Romani people leads to widespread fear, suffering, and injustice in Paris. Frollo's influence as a judge allows him to perpetuate systemic oppression and discrimination, affecting countless lives. His treatment of Quasimodo leaves deep psychological scars, as Quasimodo grows up believing himself to be a monster unworthy of love or freedom. Frollo's obsession with Esmeralda, culminates in a dramatic and destructive confrontation, leading to her near death and widespread chaos in Paris. Frollo's actions not only cause physical harm but also perpetuate a climate of intolerance and hatred. Now let's move on to their redemption and complexity. Drago is portrayed as a largely irredeemable character. His backstory, while providing some context for his actions, does not elicit significant sympathy or understanding. Drago's unyielding pursuit of power and his refusal to change or show remorse position him as a character driven by pure malice and ambition. The lack of any redeeming qualities or moments of introspection underscores his role as a straightforward antagonist whose evil is rooted in his desire for control and dominance. Frollo, while also largely irredeemable, is a more complex character. His actions are driven by a warped sense of morality and religious zeal, adding layers to his character that provoke deeper reflection. Frollo's internal conflict, particularly his struggle with his forbidden desire for Esmeralda, reveals the hypocrisy and self-delusion at the core of his character. This complexity makes Frollo a more nuanced villain, whose evil is intertwined with his personal insecurities and moral corruption. However, his refusal to acknowledge his own flaws and his ultimate descent into madness and destruction highlight his irredeemable nature. In light of all the above, comparing Drago Bludvist and Judge Claude Frollo reveals two distinct embodiments of evil. Drago's evil is characterized by his relentless ambition, brute force, and lack of remorse. His actions are driven by a desire for power and control, resulting in widespread destruction and suffering. Drago's villainy is straightforward, rooted in his belief that might makes right and that he alone should rule over dragons and humans alike. Frollo's evil, on the other hand, is more insidious and complex. His actions are driven by a perverted sense of morality and religious fanaticism, making his evil more personal and psychologically damaging. Frollo's abuse of power, systemic oppression, and profound hypocrisy create a character whose villainy is both multifaceted and deeply disturbing. His impact on individuals, particularly Quasimodo and Esmeralda, is intensely personal, adding a layer of emotional cruelty to his actions. In terms of who is more evil, Frollo emerges as the more malevolent character. While Drago's actions are undeniably brutal and far-reaching, Frollo's blend of personal vendettas, systemic abuse, and moral corruption create a more horrifying and pervasive form of evil. Frollo's ability to manipulate, oppress, and destroy under the guise of righteousness makes his villainy more chilling and complex, positioning him as the greater embodiment of evil in the realm of animated antagonists.